Reaching the absolute limit of your physical and mental potential can often look a lot like a total collapse. Down on the shoreline, life is a noisy, violent arithmetic. Thousands of white wings and yellow beaks thrash over the shallow waters, fighting for every available scrap of fish. The flock operates on a strict generational cycle: wake up, hunt, eat, sleep. Flight is treated as a mechanical necessity, a way to reach the water, while the vast sky above remains entirely ignored. Neel spends his days staring at the horizon, while the others fight for food in the surf. He calculates the distance to the clouds, obsessed with the boundary his peers refuse to acknowledge. In a society hardwired for bare existence, a mind that questions the physical limits of the world is a dangerous deviation from the instincts of the group. Neel begins testing the aerodynamics of his own body. He runs, fights the air currents, and falls until a morning updraft finally catches his wings, carrying him into the absolute quiet of the upper atmosphere. When he returns to the rocks to share the mechanics of this higher altitude, he meets a wall of silence. Within seconds, that silence morphs into vocal outrage. The flock's chief steps forward. He frames this discovery as a deliberate breach of protocol, viewing the exploration of the sky as a threat to the traditional order of the shoreline. The collective descends on Neel. They tear at his feathers and drag him across the rocks, physically enforcing his exile from the colony. He is left bleeding and alone over a massive empty ocean. He has the freedom he sought, but he is stranded in the isolation that comes with it. Stepping outside the accepted rules of a community grants access to new heights, but it often begins with an agonizing period of exile. Neel flies through storms and sleeps on jagged rocks that his wings feel heavy. He is pushing himself out of a desperate need to outrun the memory of the rocks and the beaks that tore at him. An older bird, heavily scarred but moving with effortless precision, drops from a higher altitude to match Neel's pace. He watches Neel's frantic, ragged flapping for a long time before speaking. The mentor asks why Neel is fighting the air so hard. He points out that Neel's current flight path is dictated by the flock he left behind. He is flying to prove them wrong rather than to simply be in the sky. This creates a form of psychological drag. The anger and the need for validation act as a literal physical resistance against forward momentum. As Neel fixates on the trauma of his rejection, the mental friction pulls his flight path down, making high-altitude soaring physically impossible. Surviving the mob was the initial filter, but the true barrier to mastery is letting go of the resentment they caused. The mentor instructs Neel to stop treating the wind as an opponent. He spends weeks learning to align his wing beats with the natural currents of the air, moving with the elements instead of against them. He is taught to accept fear as a constant variable. The objective is to acknowledge the danger of the height and navigate right alongside it without letting it tense his muscles. Neel begins to consciously drop the weight of his anger toward the chief and the others. As that mental anchor disappears, his wings find a new level of efficiency, creating the conditions for pure vertical lift. Without the excess weight of his past, Neel breaks through his previous ceiling. He reaches a zone of tranquility, where the ocean is a thin blue line, and his flight requires almost no effort at all. Mastery is achieved when the work is driven by your own nature and the joy of the act, rather than the ghosts of past trauma. At the peak of his training, the mentor tells Neel to fly back to the shoreline and the flock that banished him. Neel is hesitant. He questions why those who attacked him deserve the benefits of the knowledge he had to suffer to obtain. The mentor explains that knowledge kept in isolation is just a new form of ego. Keeping the sky to himself would make him no different than the chief who kept the flock on the ground. The ultimate test of a visionary is having the strength to return to the ignorant and pull them upward. Neel returns to the cliffs. The anxious energy that once defined him is gone, replaced by a quiet stillness that makes the older birds hesitate to attack him again. He sits on the edge of the rocks and speaks to the young chicks. He explains the mechanics of the wind and shows them how to tilt their wings to catch the morning thermals. Over many months, the visual landscape of the colony changes. More birds begin to step off the ledge, filling the space above the beach with soaring silhouettes. The old chief watches as the traditions he enforced are slowly replaced by the visible efficiency of Neel's methods. Eventually, the chief approaches the bird he once exiled and asks to be taught. Neel makes room on the rock and begins the first lesson. Mornings, once filled with fighting over fish, are now punctuated by groups of birds banking together into the sunrise, moving as one cohesive unit. True greatness requires both the courage to fly alone and the grace to show the rest of the world how to follow.